So welcome everybody to this Ashoka Huddle. Thank you, Jill and Andrew, for helping host this conversation. This was, the sort of idea for this conversation was planted. Welcome, Kara. We're just starting. In hearing a bit about first about Jill's experience with the $100 million challenge. And the way that allowing yourself to imagine what like a whole other level of in the resource game can allow fellows to sort of open their imaginations, their understanding of the value proposition that they can bring to the world. This is something that we actually heard in questions and conversations with our newest cohort of fellows, of which we have Casey and Katie joining. Welcome. And so just really excited to turn the microphones over to Jill and Andrew to sort of set the stage and share how they have navigated conversations like this. And I'm getting a little bit of sound in the background, so if you're in a noisy place, if you can mute, that'd be great. And two just logistical things that I'll add here. One is we want to have more conversations like this. We know that there are conversations that fellows are really well suited to have to each other, and we're really committed to doing the heavy lifting of the logistics and the setup and the inviting. So if you have an idea for a conversation you're really dying to have with fellows, please tell us. And the second is that if, because there are many voices on the chat, if you have questions or reactions as we go on, please use the chat function. You can open it in the bottom toolbar, and it's just a great way to add many voices to the conversation as we continue. So I'll stop there. Welcome. I'm going to turn the mic over to Jill to situate us in this conversation.
Sure. So it's nice to see everybody. Actually, before we jump in, can we go around just real quick and have everybody say their name and their organization, and how about just one thing about summer that they're really looking forward to? So I'll start. So Jill Vialet, I'm the founder and CEO at Playworks, and Playworks makes recess and play a great part of the school day and throughout the United States. And I am particularly looking forward to the first 2 weeks of August, where I'm going to be at the beach with my family. So I will pass it. How about Dave? You're to my right on my screen, so I'll pass that way.
Okay, did I unmute?
You did.
Yes. So I am Dave. I am now master of this technology. You have any questions, just ask me. I could be tech support. I found
That's ironic. Oh.
I know, right? Isn't it?
Dave, you totally froze right after the word.
We lost you.
How about now? Am I back?
You're back.
I'm back. By the way, I just muted myself again and unmuted. So there's a helpful tip. See?
Yeah.
Now, you can still hear me? Yes, okay. So we transform lives by restoring, expanding, and innovating music education in our public schools. And what I am looking forward to most this summer is introducing a new musical instrument that we've invented to the world, which I will do on July 28th. I have it on my calendar.
Awesome.
Nice.
You want to pass?
Oh, Casey, you're to my right in this virtual world.
Hi, y'all. It's good to meet you. Jill, I'm a huge fan of your work, so it's really great to meet you via video chat. My organization is called Arms with Ethics. We are working on preventing gun violence by bringing together all sides of the debate on collaborative projects that focus on common ground. And I am actually in the middle of what I'm most looking forward to in the summer. I'm in Arkansas with my family and my kids for vacation. So it's been lots of lake, pool, and water park for the last week. So You know, I'm lucky I'm not sunburned. So it's great to be here. Thank you.
And you should pass
it to Andrew, since you're the only other person I can see on there.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Andrew. I'm also a huge fan of Jill's work. I was saying to Jill for this call that she was my hero when we were first getting started.
This all just makes me feel old. I just want to go on record.
In effect, yeah. So very cool to co-host this with her. I am the CEO and co-founder of the Future Project. We work in schools across America to ignite the passion and purpose of young people and empower them to change the world themselves. And I think I'm going to Cancun in 72 hours for an annual week-long vacation. I actually think so I'm looking forward to that, but I will say one more thing. I'm trying for the first time this summer this Bill Gates thing called Think Week, where you just take one full week to just read. So I'm doing that in August somewhere out west. I recommend it because I did like a 3-day version of it. And it was unreal. So I actually think I might be looking even more forward to that.
And you pass.
And I will pass to, let's see, did Rafael go?
Yeah.
No. Hi, so I'm Rafael Alvarez. I'm founder and CEO of Genesis Works, where we train and hire high school students to work in meaningful internships during their senior year in high school, typically at major corporations, and discover through that experience that they can succeed as professionals and therefore, change the trajectory of their professional career. I just got back from vacation where we did the California thing, and we did 5 days of hiking in the Yosemite Sequoia parks, and it was unbelievable. I'm so jealous of you guys are living in California. I'm thinking about moving the national office to California now. So that's that for me. I'm gonna pass to Katie.
Hi everyone, it's awesome to be here. I'm Ernst, and I'm the CEO and founder of the Op-Ed Project. We're about 9 years in. Our goal and mission is to serve as a corrective to history, which doesn't include the voices or stories or intelligence of the vast majority of the planet. But instead of trying to retrofit a correction to history 100 years ago, we focus on where history is being made in the present moment. Where are the forums and source code for history as it's being told right now? And the reason we do that is because we believe the story we tell is the world we get. So that's what we do. We run programs all over that are designed to accelerate ideas and impact, and also connect underrepresented groups, including women. And I'm doing a lot of different road trips, including California twice this summer. But the thing that I'm looking forward to right now is our entire team is going to Tennessee. 22 of us are going to Tennessee, and we're going to stay, a bunch of us, a day afterwards to go to Dollyland.
Nice. That's awesome.
Oh, I guess I passed to Kara.
Well, but you got to go to Graceland if you're going to go to Dollyland.
I've been to Graceland. I have been.
Okay.
Just like I've been at Simon.
Graceland's great. I wish I could go with you to Dollyland. So my name is Cara Andrade. I am in Guatemala City, and I am the co-founder and the director of a citizen journalism network called Habla Centro. And what we do is we teach young people in particular, but we focus on everybody, learning the skills that journalists have, critical thinking skills, research skills, the craft of writing and producing stories and storytelling and narratives, authorship, just a lot of different things that go with like being a journalist. It essentially means that you're a more engaged citizen. And so that's what we do. And we do a lot of like open source tools that are free for people to use on their mobile phones. And what I'm looking forward to in Guatemala, it's actually winter. So I'm looking forward to days when it's sunny, like today, and it's not pouring outside, and being able to walk my dog as much as possible.
Thanks. Brittany, you want to go too?
let me unmute myself. I'm Brittany. I help lead the U.S. fellowship team. I throw parties like this, weave conversations together, get fellows laughing, talking, sharing, building things together. I'm excited for the first week of August. We will launch the second cohort of a popular education-rooted alternative to divinity school for justice warriors. And I'm super excited about it.
Awesome. Thanks. So jumping into this topic, I think the initial, when I was approached by Andy about it, we had just gone through the MacArthur application process. And so I'll just, by way of context, we hadn't actually really thought that seriously about applying for the MacArthur 100 and change competition, mostly because I felt like they were signaling that it was going to be an investment in climate. I thought the images all said, just screamed out climate change. Like I was like, they're not going to be that interested in us. But it was, in fact, a number of our current growth cap investors who at one of, we raised $27 million over the last couple of years from 7 big investors who we meet with twice a year. And they really do function like an advisory group. And in the context of one of those meetings, they were the ones who really pushed us to consider applying. And it was really to 2 ends. And I think really relevant for this conversation. The first was they thought it was a really worthwhile exercise to go through justifying why we merited a $100 million investment. And it's a really fascinating thing to do because it's a lot of money, and being able to articulate and going through the process of thinking through what you would do with that kind of money and why and what it means really was there. It was super helpful and in not only sort of helping us articulate a longer term vision, but also just in thinking about sort of the larger question of to what end, like what does it mean really? And then the second piece really was then thinking through what would you do with $100 million, right? And so not only justifying it, but then also like, what would you do with $100 million and coming up with a plan. And Playworks currently has a plan. We've been working with the Billions Institute and a bunch of other different folks to get to a place that we've set this aim that by December 2020, there'll be safe and healthy play in 7,000 schools, reaching 3.5 million kids, which is audacious and out there and crazy. But the $100 million was another level of jump from there. And so we went through a pretty great process where we convened internal folks, external folks, did some design thinking exercises, and really created a process around thinking it through, which was all by itself wildly valuable. And then the actual doing the application was a whole nother, there's a certain discipline and rigor that is required by the writing of an application like that I also found to be an incredibly important synthesizing process as well. Andrew's disappeared off my screen, but we were having this conversation a couple of days ago, sort of thinking about this conversation, and I thought one of his insights that was most telling was that he basically said at one point that, and Andrew, I'm sort of quoting you, that this thing you said that it was striking how in nonprofit world we live kind of with a lot of baked in constraints, that our mindset is usually around sort of frugality and how are you going to do as more with less, and all, there's just I just think there's a mindset and a set of expectations in the ecosystem that we operate that is very, on some level, limiting. And by contrast, if you think about for-profit ventures, when they come to start a for-profit business, the expectation is almost on the other extreme, that like unless you build something that's sort of Facebook-esque, people wonder why you're even bothering. So it's an interesting, I just think I'm a fan of Schumacher and Small is Beautiful, and yet I do think that in terms of thinking about systems changing, scalable work, what exists in our current ecosystem that holds us back from realizing our full potential? So, and Andrew, if you want to jump in, you had a slightly different experience, but parallel.
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. No, yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry, my computer froze and I lost you for about 3 minutes there. So I hope I'm not redundant, and I'll keep this short just in case. Yeah, three quick points. One, exactly building on this sort of $100 million challenge with MacArthur. So we went through a similar process. We decided that we were going to do it initially. And as we went through the process, something very interesting happened. And it was also our funders who had encouraged us to do it. We decided not to apply ultimately, and we didn't. But the reason is because in the course, to Jill's point on mindset, and this was sort of an unexpected experience, in the course of thinking about what the company could look like with a $100 million infusion, we inadvertently really began to realize that we weren't fully imagining the full dream of the company with the constraint of less than 100 million, but actually all the way up to $100 billion. When we started to, it's as crazy as it sounds, when we really started to think about, you know, the scale of the problem that we were trying to solve and what it would take over the long view, over the next couple of decades to do something about it, it just struck us, you know, nonprofits, it's like a big deal to think at $100 million scale, crazy to think at $1 billion scale, but then to Jill's point, there's plenty of organizations, when you say start the next Facebook, you're really talking about tens of billions or hundreds of billions of dollars in valuation. And when you realize that, you realize there's a set of mechanics so far transcendent of fundraising that could ever get you to that point. And so it inspired us to go back to basics and, you know, not really look at, there's this paradigm out there about sustainability. We get told we're trying to, you know, try to be, make sure you're sustainable. We started to rethink it and said, what if we set our target at profitability? It would require, without sacrificing our mission whatsoever, our purpose first, profitability just as a means of being able to do more of our mission. And it's caused us to go through the wildest journey over the last 3 to 6 months of redesigning our business model fundamentally, with not just a new set of information and ideas and people at the table, but actually with that mindset expanding us to think about what would this company look like if we actually managed to make it on its own accord with some major fundraising, but really through the market at $1 billion or more. And that was just crazy, and something that I wish I had actually you know, gone through even a few years ago. And we're only about 4 to 5 years in right now since we started. Second thought is to echo something also Jill shared. About 2 years ago, we had a really unexpected event where a donor you know, got in touch with us, and one thing led to another. And before we knew it, we were a company that had, you know, brought in about $2 to $3 million in revenue at all to date, offered to make an 8-figure contribution. And that just sort of took everything to a whole different level, as you can imagine, and it inspired the same amount as matching gifts from a collection of about 5 or 6 different funders. So before we know it, we had $20 million in capital. And I say in retrospect, it was one of the best and one of the worst things that had ever happened to us. And I feel that similar kinds of experiences. We learned so much through that process. The company expanded and grew in ways we could never have imagined in that period of time. But it was also a little bit of a blessing in disguise, because I think it's easy, at least in retrospect, we realized that it's too easy to mistake a successful fundraising win, especially for kind of national funding from a major national partner to just grow the capacity, as in any way related to a quality business model. And they really have actually nothing to do with each other. And so that caused us, through in conversation with this funder who re-upped, it's not a negative experience, but it really forced us to learn actually from Playworks and a few other groups around this paradigm shift. It's really 2 totally different kinds of fundraising. The kind of fundraising to support more of what you're doing, and the kind of fundraising that really serves as an investment or high-level partnership among a small, ideally. You don't want to diversify this group too much. 5 to 15 max people or organizations who are really supporting at a very significant level the growth of capacity for the next phase. And the separation of those two, the unconflation of those two, simple thing, but really game changing. Final thought, there is this myth that I was just reading about in a book I picked up that I'd recommend called Wonderland. It's by the guy Stephen Johnson, who wrote Where Good Ideas Come From. And he takes on this myth of the idea that necessity is the mother of invention. And he talks about how if you actually look at history, and I'm oversimplifying it a little bit, necessity, survival is not actually what has led to great creativity, innovation, and breakthrough ideas in the social realm or outside of it in the market, whatever. And instead he says, actually, it's the feeling of luxury. It's the feeling that you can play around, that you can experiment, and so forth. And Peter Thiel, different dot to connect to this, has this line in 0 to 1, his book about strategy and building the future, that a company is in either one of two modes. It's either in a state of survival, trying to meet payroll and get enough cash for the next 12 months, or it is in a state of where it has more than enough cash and it can burn through it without any consequences. And that's actually when great innovation comes. So it sort of, in synthesis, it led me to kind of realize that, we've got to be dreaming as social enterprise if we really believe that what we're doing has value. And I think we all do think that what we're doing has real value at not just the $100 million level, but the $100 billion level. That you want to find your investors through your core business and not mistake that for a quality business model. And that you want to do everything you can to make the case for excess capital for no particular purpose whatsoever besides experimentation and play, because that's where the big new ideas come from.
Thanks. It's such an interesting thing. The one thought that I had is feeling this tension between being given permission and there a sense of there being abundance and an environment that fosters creativity, and then also recognizing and feeling like the lean model, also that mindset around constraints, also encouraging creativity. I just spent a year down at the D School at Stanford learning about design thinking and being immersed in it, and it was such an interesting experience because Stanford's a bubble, right? And it's this abundant, crazy place where you just feel like there's so many resources and there's so much possible. But they really do a lot to use play and other games and other sort of constraints to really force creativity in a way, or to encourage creativity. I guess forcing creativity is not quite right, but to encourage creativity that, I think that is why iambic pentameter and, the haiku kind of create great poetry, is that there is something in constraints as well around creativity. Anyway, Raphael, I was interested in sort of asking you a little, as someone who sort of came from the for-profit sector, and this is your sort of second act in the nonprofit sector, if what you've seen and anything that sort of by way of contrast or comparison, or are the differences less than one might think, or is there any reactions you have to sort of what Andrew and I have been sort of mulling over?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that from a perspective. Of course, I'm going to say things that you all know. But the biggest difference between the for-profit and the nonprofit sector, other than mission, of course, is the fact that the for-profit sector has a common measure of impact, and that is $1, right? That is revenues, and so profitability, and so that allows for any relationship to happen, and at the end of the day, you can calculate the benefits of that relationship for either party through profitability. In the social sector, we don't have a common unit of measure, a common unit of impact. And therefore, it's very, very difficult for for-profit people to come in and invest in our sector because we can't provide that calculation that has become universal in the other sector. So that's one thing. The other thing is the obvious one, which is return on investment. Access to capital is not as available here as it is in the for-profit world, and that affects how we invest in innovation. I mean, I will give you an example. One of my board members who made a fortune in the for-profit sector, and I went to him and I said, I want to have a chunk of change for, innovation, experimentation, and R&D. And it was surprising to me that he resisted the idea very greatly, because he wants to pursue sustainability and strength and stability, and efficiency. And what I don't understand is, how can you be so successful in one venue, investing in research and capitalizing from the results that research brings, and be so risk averse in the social sector? So, Joe, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's, the main difference that I've seen between the two is that measure.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. It is. I'll be interested to see. I mean, even just over the last 20 years of working at Playworks, and I've been doing sort of nonprofit work for 30 years. It is interesting, and granted, right now everything going on in the world, all bets are off. But it does feel like there's been an increasing muddying. Actually, one of the original investors, who's a shared investor, I think for a few of us, but the family that brought Ashoka to North America, Ron Jensen. Ron got so mad when I was first inducted as a Ashoka Fellow, and I remember him saying to me, I hate that you're called a social entrepreneur. You're just an entrepreneur. Like, I don't know why they have to put that social moniker on there. And so I'll be interested to follow as the world continues to evolve, if it gets muddier for for-profits as well, because the bottom line argument makes sense if you're actually operating in a world where the real cost of doing business are accurately measured. But if you look at the way that environmental costs and other social systems costs are sort of discounted and not really calculated effectively into the costs of doing business currently, as businesses feel more compunction to be sustainable in a, not just in terms of the business itself, but in a more global way, will their ability to measure the bottom line get harder for them as well? It's an interest. I think we're at a point of a real inflection point for how we measure impact and effectiveness and the economics of doing business, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit. Did anybody else apply for MacArthur? I was just sort of interested. No? Dave, y'all didn't?
No, we, like everyone, we considered it, but we were like, they just seemed like the messaging that we got that signaled like, danger Will Robinson was like data, data. And it's like, we have data. I'm married. I had the good sense to marry a data scientist. So I understand the limitation of trying to prove causality. And, we have data that a real social scientist would say, sorry, that's not real data. So we opted not to. Also, we learned a little late, and seemed like it was going to be a bit of a fire drill. But hearing, a bunch of us were, at least I know some of the folks on this call are also Draper Richards Kaplan entrepreneurs. And I remember after I went through that process, before we got, selected, I felt grateful just for having gone through the process, for the rigor of like, if we were going to scale this to a national thing. So I am kind of thinking, I don't know whether MacArthur is going to do it again or not, but I feel like we're at a point, and there's a reason I wanted to go to this huddle, like we're at a point where I feel like we actually have a reasonable idea of how we would use funding at that level, not at the level that Andrew mentioned, but more like, $100 million, a measly $100 million. I feel like we could do, we could make a really strong case for system change. So, but no, we didn't apply. That was my long-winded way of saying no, we didn't. So now I'll go on mute again.
It is funny though. I just look. After Andrew made the point about about billions of dollars. I mean, George Clooney's tequila company just got a $1 billion valuation. Like, how crazy is the world that we live in, where thinking about effectively dealing with guns and arms isn't valued as much as tequila. Like, I'm just like, in the mix of the two is really problematic. It's really.
Well, Jill, that's easy to explain. As a Mexican, I'll tell you all about it.
It is pretty good tequila.
Jesus Christ. It's pretty good George Clooney.
That would be a great case to him. I mean, he is a philanthropist. Like, would you give as much money as your tequila company is worth to a cause, or raise it for us?
Well, and it's just an interesting point I'll put out there. Like, again, pictures people, and Raphael, you mentioned the risk-averse nature of this otherwise, bold, visionary investment person. They talk about that they're doing venture philanthropy, as if their philanthropic investments somehow could be equated with their not-for-profit, actually with their for-profit investments. But of course, it's a false equivalency, right? Because the dough that they're dishing out to profit-generating startups, dwarfs what they invest in the social sector. There's just something about, I think people I think it's a psychological thing. People are afraid of getting burned, more afraid of getting burned when they're doing something for the social good than they are for profit. I don't know why. I feel like there's a lot of rich room there to drill down.
But what's so interesting, though, given that, right, is the simultaneous, and I think that's true, right, because you don't want to look foolish and so there is simultaneously the urge to give, like, really conservative giving, like all the people investing in, and I mean this lovingly, but like boys and girls clubs, as sort of like, okay, that we know they're vetted, you're never going to look like a jerk investing in boys and girls club. But that being said, we also have the experience where many funders, because when the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation made a big investment in us, then other people didn't jump on the sort of bandwagon to fund us the way, had it been Warren Buffett investing in a for-profit company, people would have been lining up. And so even with this MacArthur thing, right, we had hoped, and our funders were sort of hoping, that if one did well, that it could then be parlayed into encouraging other investments. And we were one of the top 10 education. We scored in the top 200, and we were one of the top 10 education applications, and got a fair bit of media around it from both MacArthur and then just recently Charity Navigator highlighted us for having such a successful application. We weren't in the top 8 total. There was not a single education group chosen. But anyway, we haven't heard a peep from anybody who saw that and is like, oh, I think, I mean, I didn't marry a data scientist, but I believe that people love data when it confirms what they already believe to be true intuitively. And if data is not going to change anybody's desire to invest in you other than that.
So Jill and Andrew, I have a question, and I'll invite folks to like refine this question if it's more helpful to you a different way. But there are people on this call who are considering or trying to take first steps toward going through a similar process, and you both used the word process. We went through a process. We went through a planning process with our board, with our advisors, with our team. Jill, you said we did some design thinking exercises. I wonder if there are what were the cornerstones of that process? If there are people, what are the questions you should be asking yourselves, or is it hiring decisions that you should rethought, or just like what are some of the questions or the levers or the exercises that really helped sort of pry your thinking open? And I'll invite Katie, Casey, Cara, in different ways we've had this conversation, so maybe I'll invite you to tack onto that.
Andrew, you want to go first? Because last time I went first and then you had to follow and it didn't seem fair.
That's the hard one. Okay, so so lots of different things, and I'm happy to share some. I'll put some together by the end of this hour and put them on the chat here with some links to different things. The MacArthur kind of application process, as discussed itself, was very helpful. But I think what I really found, what we found most helpful ultimately were a couple of different things. So one, there's a checklist of 4. I mentioned this book, and he's a little bit of odd controversial figure, but Peter Thiel, yeah, in 0 to 1. It's not at all meant for nonprofits, but it's not in any way inconsistent, and it's actually it will break a lot of your mental models for strategy. At least when we found this. So we actually all read it as a team, and a lot came out of that. And there's sort of 4 key things that he talks about that each became an exploration. The first is, what is your proprietary, but that's like a funny word in this space, so it's not really about that. It's more, what is the technology, not digital technology, what's the technology at the heart of what you're doing that is 10x better than anything else out there, or represents something that is a 0 to 1, in his words, innovation. And even that exploration process really forces you not to think. I think sometimes the irony is we think very big in the nonprofit world about scale and growth and all these kinds of things. And actually what I've found, and what this book recommends, and a number of other things like that, it's actually not really thinking about the big growth. It's about thinking about the unit of 1 unit, essentially, of impact, or 1 unit of value, essentially. And so that's really on that level. Like, what is that exponentially better experience? Because if you have that, you can usually build a business around that, if it's something that's really tapping into a unique need. And every one of you on this call has something that you could be best in the world at. And so that's one. The second thing is, he talks a lot about the redesign of your business model and your unit to allow for the network effects, so that the bigger it gets, the better it gets, as opposed to what often happens in programs and social services. So the bigger it gets, the more diluted it gets. And so that just requires a whole redesign of the fundamentals of how you're doing what you're doing, and the design perhaps of technologies and otherwise that make growth increase product quality for any 1 unit. 3 is the exploration of the economy of scale. And this is, again, is an issue that plagues a lot of nonprofits, but how do you create a model where actually the whole organization does not have to get bigger the more people that it reaches? And this is really the fundamental phenomenon that so many technology companies have tapped into. In our space, it's pretty magical when someone does. So this is the 3rd exploration. And then the 4th exploration is actually brand, which is, again, one of those things that can be undervalued in this world, and donors don't necessarily value, but is so fundamental. And his point is you've got to create a brand that is in some fundamental way iconic and distinctive. And it's funny, like, none of those things are about your growth strategy or there's a few things he gets into about that, but each of those explorations sort of put an angle or point of view around what we were doing. The second big set of things was, and I'll end in a moment, the second big set of things was the, this may sound strange, but he's come in the news a lot recently. Another interesting, controversial person, Jeff Bezos. We did this funny thing where we looked at all of his shareholder letters, and his shareholder letters are these incredible windows into strategic thinking. And we sort of induced, essentially, from each of the thought processes, what were the questions he asked his team that caused him to reach given answers. So we have a list of those questions. And when we started asking ourselves those questions, these were questions we had never in our first 4 years asked ourselves, and they were totally eye-opening. So that was the second big category of stuff.
Give us one.
I will. Let me send you a list of a few on the chat channel over here. But yeah, it's like it's stuff like everything that Bezos does, and I found this super interesting, is really, and people may know this, but is really with like this long view, long-term thinking in mind. And so what all the strategic choices are really about the question of how in 15 to 20 years can we be leaders in the market that we're defining as our market? And what bold bets that are not going to necessarily pay off in the next several years can we make now to go there? And unapologetically taking that long view. And all the questions are really about maximizing future cash flows. So it's in our world, what could it look like to make decisions now that maximize future impact flows, 20 years out? And you end up with a lot of very counterintuitive conclusions. So I can get into more stuff, but those are sort of two areas that I think were a little bit more off the beaten path that led us to really interesting conclusions.
And Jill, before we move to you, just encouraging folks, if there's something that's sticking out or a question that's coming from something that Jill or Andrew or others are saying, please put it. The chat is a great sort of way to build a parking lot of other questions and thoughts. Jill.
Well, and so I mean, a lot of what Andrew's saying overlaps. So we looked at it differently a little bit, and I think we went into this planning process already having a sort of strategic plan in place. And I think, and we've been working for the last, because of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation approaching us and asking for this plan, about 10 years into our existence. And it's been an evolving, living document ever since. But we have this sort of general path to scale, which has always sort of focused initially on flagship, which was building our core business and having it in somewhere between 25 and 35 major markets across the United States. And then the second part being our broad adoption strategy, which was thinking about how you take the key business we have and turn that into training, which really gives other people the capacity to run with it. And then the third phase that we've always sort of talked about and only recently started to really address has been the movement building phase, right? Where you're really unleashing the strategy and the sort of insights that make our widget good, giving those to other people who we would never actually come into direct contact with. And I think probably 10 years ago when we were first talking about this, my assumption was that the movement building was going to have a heavy policy emphasis. But American politics being what it is, we really have, and the world changing, we really have shifted our belief that the movement is going to happen via digital technologies and online. So the specifics around the process were one, that was thinking. It was a 2-hour conversation with our funders about if we were to go for $100 million, really, what would they want to fund? I just went right to the, cow or the horse or what, I'm not even sure what the metaphor would be there, but we went right to the funders and said, okay, and our growth cap investors do function in this hybrid way. They are both our funders and investors. In some ways, I think they are advisors and mentors the way I kind of wish my board was more. And they're so professionally knowledgeable about the sector, they tend to be slightly more helpful to me in terms of thinking through strategy than my actual board is. And my board knows this, so I don't think I'm saying anything out of school. And then after that conversation with them, the senior team here really started to think going beyond. So there were a couple of in-depth meetings where we were just talking through, and for us to getting to the idea of every kid in America getting to play every day has always been part of the vision. And that's, I think Andrew's point about measurable and metrics, that's, we know that's 70,000 schools, right? That's 35 million kids. By design, our current goal of getting to 7,000 schools and 3.5 million kids is one 10x jump away. And thinking about what are we capable of handling. So currently to get to 2020, we're undergoing 5x growth. And recognizing because we have a 20-year history, we know what we are capable of in terms of those growth. So there was a lot of digging into the numbers. There was also a lot of looking at, and convening different groups. There was some, I synthesize information by writing. So there was a lot of me writing and playing and talking about that kind of stuff. And then I mentioned too the design thinking. So we brought together some senior staff, but who aren't on the exec team, but people who've been with Playworks for a long time, in conjunction with some outside, both stakeholders like some superintendent, some folks who've partnered with us from Boys and Girls Club, other organizations, as well as some people who were just people in the sector that we respected. We did 2 different design thinking 3-hour sessions where we did everything from journey mapping, where we had people imagine out from where we currently are to there being safe and healthy play in 70,000 schools. Really kind of blue sky, like what would people design? And one of the most valuable things was that senior staff here were like, this is really hard, like, which is always good to have your senior staff recognize how hard this kind of strategic thinking is. And they also had some great out of the box ideas. In some ways, there was a woman from Aspire Charter Schools, Dawn, the founder, is another Ashoka fellow. Anyway, she knew the least about Playworks in some ways. Aspire, we partner with Aspire at Playworks, but in some ways her lack of being encumbered by actually knowing us well, she generated some of the most amazing ideas. And we also brought in people who were, part of the sort of, one of the values of design thinking is radical collaboration, so bringing together people from very disparate perspectives. One of the ideas that came through that was with someone who was with the Cal State, not with Cal State, was with the, the Department of Agriculture runs schools and stuff like that, and land grant schools and stuff like that. And so this whole idea about there being people, and I'm going to get the term wrong, but I guess with agriculture information, there used to be these land agents who would share knowledge about seeds among farms, and so anyway, just getting to these kind of divergent conversations about historical transfer of knowledge communally in a way that ultimately fostered the greatest sense of ownership out in the world. So anyway, there were lots of different setups where we convene people to have those kinds of out-of-the-box thinking that ultimately, for me, led us to having a big sort of bunch of information to work with. And then we brought it back, and Elizabeth and I, Elizabeth's our president and COO, and I ended up taking that and then recalibrating and writing, and then sending that final proposal out again. But it was an iterative process, and ultimately I thought really great.
Thank you, Jill. Andrew is sharing some of these questions that are beautiful, and one of them relates to a question, Katie, that you shared the end of the second one. What will be your value proposition for tomorrow, not just today? And Katie, please add on here, but Jill, Andrew, has your value proposition changed in this process? Katie, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'm just going to restate the thing I said in the chat, which I'm not totally sure it's what I what I wanted to ask, but have there been moments of epiphany where you've had a change in who you saw as the market or what you saw as the problem? I actually, I want to just share I feel like this is a really important question for me and a lot of other people, particularly for people who haven't broken through to that kind of boundless thinking, Andrew, that you were talking about at the beginning. Because in order to have that boundless thinking, I think that there's a world where it's possible to be like, yeah, we should all be full of abundance and limitless. But actually, the thing that makes that possible is being able to actually envision that kind of limitless value. Like, it doesn't come without some pretty powerful thinking. And I'm just gonna give a little example. This is like a kind of a mosh together of different people's examples. But when I started my organization without really I understood the value proposition to history, but not as a unit that could actually have investors. And what happened is there was a New York Times article about me, and people asked to take a class. And so all of a sudden, all these people popped up on the organization that I worked for, asking to take a class. So that was the first idea. Oh, it's a value to individuals. And then I realized maybe there was a value actually to the institutions. That was my next leap, rather than the individuals, to the institutions and then I realized that the value was not the institutions investing in those individuals. It was the institutions, it was no longer about teaching someone to write or even about their visibility. It was about their retention 20 years out of their talent. But then I actually realized a lot of what we're doing could be seen in a much more valuable way if, for example, and I think the Unreasonable Institute did something like this, instead of targeting those institutions as the market, instead maybe they were the product. So what if those institutions were, I think what they are doing is, I'm not totally sure of this, but my partial understanding was that they got investors to invest in folks working on climate change, one of the world's biggest problems. So instead of the organizations working on climate change, seeing them as their market, instead they see them as the product, and they're going to accelerate that product. And then the investors come from people who want to solve climate change. Big investors. I might be getting this wrong, and actually that's somewhat irrelevant, even if I'm getting that wrong. My question is, have you had moments where you've been able to understand, in not just in the abstract, that limitless value, but moments where you've had epiphanies or changes in how you understood what you were doing, what was the product, what was the problem, what was the market? And have you had any moments like that?
Well, Jill, I'll just jump in. So totally, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it's been a sudden real epiphany that oh, now this has always been true. It feels more like an evolutionary change, that as the organization has grown and we've emphasized different things along the sort of path to scale, that first off, different capacities have been required of us, right? So in the beginning, when we were just building out the flagship and replicating what we did really well, the key capacity was management. Managing a big organization across multiple sites is a real thing. Who knew management was real? Not me.
Yeah.
And then the second phase, when we were building out broad adoption, suddenly we needed to really develop capacity internally around sales, because even though we're a nonprofit, we were still selling our services to different districts, right? And then more recently, as we've been moving into the sort of movement building phase, it's just really aware of the centrality of the capacity of marketing and communications. And it's not like those three, that management and marketing and sales aren't still required, and that they don't overlap, but just getting really good at them. And then the other just sort of one insight that I had that just seems so blindingly obvious, but I was at a gathering at the Media Lab at MIT, and it was being co-hosted by the Media Lab and by Mozilla, and it was around how what open technologies like Mozilla, or all the internet and all the interweb things, what they could teach social change organizations. And Mitchell, the woman who's the co-founder and head of Mozilla, said this thing about how, when you're opening up technology to all the Mozillans who write code for them and look it back and forth, and you're unleashing them to run the organization, it has to be a two-way street, and they actually have to be able to influence what Mozilla is doing as well as so. And I had to admit that I'd been thinking about unleashing and creating these open resources for the rest of the world to use from Playworks as being a very one-way street, that we were going to take our technology and what we'd learned about making play great in schools and give it to teachers and after-school workers and other people in schools. And then they would happily and appreciatively take our technology and run and own it. And it seems to be so blindingly obvious now in retrospect that if I really want them to own it, I have to let them own part of us too. So anyway, I'll stop there.
So wait, Jill, sorry. So when you say co-own it or whatever, you mean act?
Oh no, David, we lost you.
Use of it. Did I freeze again?
Yeah.
It says that my internet is unstable, which is reassuring to me because I thought it was deeper than that for me. So my question is, when you said that they co-own it, did you mean that their own innovations, their own contributions to your model actually impacted it, right? They weren't just passive recipients, but co-creators over time.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're going to unleash things, right, and you're going to ask people to take your stuff and run with it, inevitably they're going to learn things, and they're going to, and it's funny, Andrew mentioned that as we, that the danger as you grow of things becoming diluted, right? And I can't tell you how many times when we were opening new offices, the original staff would say, oh yeah, it's never going to be as good. Playworks in New York's never going to be as good as Playworks, the original OG Playworks in Oakland. And what we found, in fact, was that when the fervor of the neophytes, right, that the new people who were bringing Playworks to Atlanta, Georgia, were they had a fervor and a belief in it. And like the folks opening it in Minnesota were experimenting with the fact that you can use Kool-Aid powder to put down lines in the snow for outdoor play at recess. Like they were improving it, but they also needed to be given the chance to own it. And you couldn't always run an organization where the original Oakland program was seen as the best and the original. And so similarly, then when we started doing training, we would use language like calling the training Playworks Light, which is just disrespectful and disparaging. And when I recognized that maybe the dosage wasn't intense, but actually there were so many ways in which Playworks Pro, our training model, actually could be as good, and ultimately was usually stickier, right? Like it was going to have a more lasting impact. And then in this more recent phase, when we're unleashing it, people, right? We trained, because of Ashoka, we trained these people in Ireland with no intention of opening an office in Ireland. There are 35 schools in Ireland that call themselves Playworks schools who I've never met. I originally trained like a dozen teachers there who've now shared it and own it, and it's self-propelled, and they call themselves Playworks and they share information and they own it. Like, and so it's recognizing that as you scale, the common theme, right, is that you forfeit control. And so how do you do that gracefully and in a way that is respectful of the control that you have essentially licensed to others?
Great. I know we're just at time, but I might turn over Andrew. I don't know if you have either something that in response to what Jill said, or to Katie's original question, and then I might make a formal end, and if people have time to hang around, you're absolutely welcome to. The Huddle living room will stay open.
Sure, I'll just keep it super quick because we're over time. One, that I agree, it's very much an evolutionary process, and Jim Collins talks about this phenomenon. Some organizations that are kind of frustrated with their growth and their scale or whatever start to get on this flywheel where they keep looking for the big epiphany, and that causes them to keep restarting everything. And so I think what you want to, but he also talks about, it takes about, every 5-year chunks before you really have a big new breakthrough often about your business. So that evolutionary process is certainly what we've experienced, but it's made up of lots of little epiphanies, and little moments, and little reframings and things. And speaking of framing, it's the second point I'd make, is that I think just constantly asking yourself, your team, the age-old, like almost cliche question, what business are we in? And playing with different framings of that. Really interesting things come out of that. And the final thing, more concretely and kind of on the ground, and this is really where the greatest insights come from, I think, there's this like little test, which is, if you do a lot of things and you think you know what your product is, to your point, you think you know what your value is. It's a great test, which is figure out just what people who you're serving, your customers, so to speak, what are they talking about and telling their friends about and their peers about, independent of you. They just can't help but talk about it. It usually is a very strong correlation to whatever people are naturally selling on your behalf without you asking them to. That gives you, I think, the insights to revise what maybe you're in a more micro way your specific innovation is, or in a more macro way what your entire business is. That's what I've got. Thank you so much for this.
Yeah.
The Ashoka team, Jill, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all.
Excited to continue this somehow.
Thank you, everyone.
This is beautiful. Thank you, Jill and Andrew.
Thank you so much.
And thank Annie. Okay.
Call me.
Bye.